Welcome to the Camera Shake podcast with me, Kersten and Nick Kirby, the podcast where we talk about photography, videography, making photos, making videos, and anything that's got anything to do with any of that. Today, we have another special guest, Chris Knight, who's going to be with us in a second. But before we get to that, there's a couple of other things we have to discuss. So, episode 63. It's been a busy week, man.
Has it?
Yeah, it's been very busy.
I've not really got off the sofa. I don't.
Really? Well,
no, that's not true.
It's been busy because we've done a couple of shoots. One was a test shoot.
Yes.
For a shoot that actually happened yesterday, which would have been like a week ago if you're watching this on a Thursday, clearly. That was interesting.
Well, I wasn't there for the actual shoot on this occasion.
Right.
But I was there for the test shoot.
Yeah.
And the test shoot was damn interesting.
Yeah. It was, what was actually really good or what felt really good was to be, to actually shoot another human being in the studio type of setting. I mean, that's, we haven't done that many of those since COVID, really.
No.
That's just, I don't know. It just feels good. It feels like things are coming back.
It felt good to do that as a test shoot scenario, but I can only imagine what it was like for the actual shoot and for the particular person it was with as well, which no names.
Exactly. So that's going to be something we're going to reveal the whole nature of this project probably at some point next month, I suppose. So that was interesting. So, but what we did was we did a test shoot that would just basically enable us to dial in some lighting and just experiment with some bits because the nature of that shoot, there were a few complications that I could see that I wanted to just tackle before the subject was in the studio.
Yeah,
as it were, just just a time saver and stuff like that. So,
and it's normal to do that as well, right? I don't always think people believe that things like that should happen, or it's not professional to have to do test shoot. It bloody is. If you don't do it, it's not professional.
Yeah, I mean, this is just something I think that's probably not so commonly known is the fact that test shoots happen all the time.
Yeah,
like literally all the time.
And okay, it's one thing if it's a setup that you do all the time. You don't necessarily need to do a test shoot for everything like that, or it's a particular headshot session. Or
although,
style.
even with COVID and everything, like coming back to just doing ordinary headshots, even that felt a little bit rusty.
Yeah, absolutely.
After 10 months of not doing any or something.
So why not blow away the cobwebs or whatever it is that you'll want to try out that's, we've not done it. I've not done it quite like that before. Before I actually have an actual client in, let's try it out on someone.
Yeah, I mean, even just testing the equipment. In fact, I mean, there was one scenario during the test shoot or just before the test shoot where stuff wasn't happening because some firmware or another hadn't been updated. So immediately,
perfect
example. Yeah, so that would have been, that would have cost 40 minutes or something, of time had that happened on shooting day. So again, those are the kind of the typical scenario for that kind of thing. So
yeah.
That was good. But what I loved about this particular shoot was that there were props involved. And as you well know, I love a good prop.
You do love a good propping, don't you? Prop.
Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome. I liked it. We're talking like fake snow, stuff like that, glue guns.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the test bit, because that's the part that I know, and then we'll move on to how the actual shoot went, because I still don't know. I have seen part of the result from it.
Yeah, true.
Which let's not get into that just yet. So for the test shoot, okay, well, why don't you explain first of all why you felt you on this occasion needed to do a test shoot, why it made sense.
Okay, so the initial task in this was to basically recreate a particular photo.
Yeah.
And so the only way that could be done was as a composite, which may or may not be somewhat different from the original shot. But what I meant was, it meant that we had to have a look at, first of all, we had to analyze the original photo in terms of lighting and all that kind of jazz. And, and then it was a matter of actually just trying it out, testing things out, making sure we're using the right modifiers and, had things dialed in because really, when the subject arrives on set, that's the last thing you want to do there's always to some degree, you have to try things out and
Of
test
course.
things, but you want to have a really, really good idea of what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, basically you have to have a game plan I think is, what it boils down to. And so in this particular case, because there wasn't an infinite amount of time for the actual shoot either. So it wasn't like, okay, well, we have the actual model there, the actual subject there, and we've got all day to shoot. It wasn't quite like that. It was, it was limited time. So, so the more headway we could make before the actual shooting day, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we tried, I guess, effectively 3 different modifiers for the key light on this occasion.
Yeah.
We tried a reflector, beauty dish, and a beauty dish with a grid on.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Yeah.
And that grid it may as well be a totally different thing.
Gritty.
My God. It's 85 stops of light taken away.
Yeah, it's quite a true thing. But, I think one of the problems with this particular shoot was that, or this part of the shoot was that, it's a matter of shooting for extraction, meaning that you're going to replace the background. And so there's certain things that you can do to make your life easier in post. That's really the point. So, trying, and unfortunately, in this case, as we all know that it's notoriously difficult to cut out hair, unfortunately, the whole hat was fur.
Yeah.
So, so going into it, I already knew, like, okay, cool, we're going to have to come up with a way to make that a little bit easier, so that...
And it's not like they're flyaways and hair that you can easily get rid of. These are quote unquote flyaways that you want to keep as well.
Because
it's part of the look.
Yeah, we can probably say, it's like an Arctic Explorer type, theme, if you want. And so, that's was going to be, that was always going to be tricky to do in post to an extent, to do it well, basically. Yeah. And so there are things you can do during the shoot. Although, having said that, of course, what happens in a test shoot and what then actually goes down on the actual shoot, that may very well be different things depending on what you learn from the test shoot, and what the situation actually is in shooting there, because things happen, whatever. So
yeah.
So I think the test shoot went really well. There were a number of takeaways there that definitely made the following day easier.
I think we certainly worked out these are the things to look for and to be aware of should that scenario arise,
So here's the thing, I think, is that people often think that what you do in a test shoot is that you figure out what works. When in reality, it's more like you're figuring out what doesn't work.
Yes, right.
And that's
right.
That's a really important point. Because it may be that you don't have the right tool for the job, or it may be that you figure out that when you do use the right tool, you might actually not quite like the look of it.
Yeah.
And so, it's these sort of decisions that you make. So, for instance, just as an example, in the original image, the one that we were trying to, imitate in a way, the light was very hard in that. And I knew that, although we were kind of replicating that, I knew that on shooting day, may not necessarily be the right way to light our actual subject out for a number of reasons. And the things like, age, face shape, blah, blah, and so on. And so I kind of thought, we're going to have to come away from the light being like super contrasty and super hard, but we can't go all the way to it being a softbox. So, we're going to have to find that middle ground that gives us the right amount of contrast without being too hard and being too soft. I think it was a lot about that, and that's
Yeah.
So that was a thing. So it was a matter of eliminating a number of different things,
And I think that is what you said a second ago about the the photo that we were trying to recreate, and it wasn't necessarily a direct 100% intent recreation. It was to get, this is the feel, this is the type of look that we want to go for. The subject that was in that particular photo was older, right?
Yeah.
And actually that harder light work lends itself to perhaps that kind of skin type, an older skin type. Whereas who you were shooting is nowhere near that particular age. And actually what you just described, that maybe it doesn't need to be quite as hard for that particular model, makes so much sense, and it's not often thought about necessarily in that way.
And of course, the thing is, because you're dealing with, it really, I mean, if you take the model and the props, for example, what you're working with are approximations of the original shot. So that's because they weren't exactly the same; they're slightly different. And the hood in particular was different in the sense that
it was quite different, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So there were certain differences that would just make it harder to get light into the face. Blah blah blah. And so really, you're just working with an approximation anyway. So then, when it comes to the other element in the shot, like for example, the lighting, already you're looking at an approximation of the original shot. So basically that means like lighting direction. Well, that's relatively easy. The hardness of the light, that's where you've got a little bit of wiggle room and so on and so forth. So you can kind of go through all these different elements and go like, okay, where does this work? And you can think of it as like on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10 or something, and then you can always kind of go, okay, well, where on that scale does that fall? And, what works with this particular model or subject? I mean, in the same way that you would, if you're talking about like something like, I don't know, corporate headshots, for example. Yeah. Typically you would light men and women differently. For that reason, because typically, and unless somebody has a particular set of facial features or something, but because in principle that usually works.
Yep.
And so yes, this shoot wasn't vastly different in that. We knew we wanted to have some dramatic lighting in it. I also knew that I wanted to try out different things. So the setup that we're describing was really just one of a number of different setups. And I had a really good idea for some other kind of much darker shots, which turned out really, really cool. I think they were a lot more dramatic. So overall, I'm really happy with the end result. Although I haven't actually at this point finished the post production on all of the shots just yet. But
I think what's interesting about the composite shot, the shot that you took that you're going to cut out and put another background on, is you can liken that a lot to green screen video.
Yeah, true.
Right. And if you watch film and you see that moment where, oh, that's probably CGI, or just go back a little bit further, you'll see films where what the subject, the actor in the film looks, and it's usually that they look slightly brighter than they probably should for that scene. That's because it's been done on a green screen and they weren't lit correctly.
Yeah,
they weren't 100% right, and they almost look washed out compared to the background. Is usually how I perceive it when I see a bad green screen. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that it could have been done a bit better. And over the years, obviously, that's got better and better and better. But so my point is that doing a composite shot like you've just done, where you're shooting someone on a background and cutting them out and putting them on a different background, you need to be really, really careful and very particular about the lighting for that shot so that it's going to blend into your final shot, which is, I mean, basically, this shot was done on a darker background,
well,
right? But it's going to end up with a very light background.
Oh, okay, no. So this is a different. Yeah, so this was a different. That was a different setup. So basically, the one that I did for extraction was on a white background because I know.
Oh, you did go ahead and do that on a white background.
Yeah. So because I knew that the background that I'm actually going to use is going to be much brighter because it's sort of an Arctic theme, so it's going to be bright. So the darker shot was really just a different thing, a different idea that I had for that, which really sort of takes us into the realms of kind of dramatic portraiture. And, when it comes to dramatic portraiture, I don't know anybody better to talk to than to New York City-based portrait photographer, educator, author, and the unrivaled master of dramatic lighting. Give it up for Mr. Chris Knight. Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Hey, man.
I'm good, thank you. How are you? Thank you for having me. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate that.
It's all true, actually. It's all Absolutely. True because the first time I came across you was actually when I was watching a creative life class about low-key portraiture. Yeah.
Cool. That was a good bit ago. That was glad you appreciated it and still sticking along. So
absolutely. It's actually, I mean, to be honest, it's made a lot of. It's made a major difference to the way that I shoot portraits, and the way I see light and the way I learn to work with light. So, thank you very much for that.
You. No, thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things, throughout this podcast, over the last year or something, it's interesting to speak to people who have actually had some major impact on my personal growth, I guess, as a photographer, and probably the same thing can be said for you, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's been an unusual year. Let's say that.
Well, yeah. How's it been for you? I mean, I know it's excruciatingly hot where you are right now.
It is very, very warm. We've got a little bit of a heat wave at the moment, but it's I think the world over around here at least is starting to regain some sense of normalcy. Work seems to have kind of come back. I kind of said, like, I felt like there were tons of people just jonesing to do projects and do work.
Yeah,
because they've had personal stuff that they worked on for months and months over quarantine, and then now they've got the ability to actually get out into the world and create and implement, and they're just, I think, going nuts with kind of how active and proactive they are and wanting to be with getting the stuff out into the world. And it's kind of been really, really nice. I have had a couple of commercial gigs this year already. One of them was a full on big production with 20, 30 people, and it's been great to be able to kind of get back to that world a little bit.
Yeah. Did you focus on any personal projects while over the last, I guess, 18 months it's been now, isn't it?
So sort of. I definitely have been screwing around with some things. Nothing that actually ended up as anything. It was more of just kind of experimenting around with different processes and trying to kind of figure out some experimental technical things. There was one thing in particular that I think it probably took me the better part of 2 or 3 months to kind of figure out and to make work. And it was a cool thing to kind of get that to come together.
What was that? It fascinates me to understand that what someone like yourself would be experimenting on.
I don't know, maybe it's masochistic, but I'm a glutton for, I like processes that make my life much harder. Whereas I think most people look into camera processes that make their lives easier. I usually, like, for personal work, I'm trying to make it as hard on myself as I possibly can for whatever reason, right? Like I think my next thing is, like, I really want to learn wet plate, which is just, if you've ever seen it done or know anything about it, It is just incredibly difficult. Relatively difficult to kind of what we're used to, way to produce an image. And I'm fascinated by it. And I've got a friend of mine who does it, and she did like this really amazing project. She's this very kind of quirky photographer. Her name is Adriana Seymour. She's somebody I teach with. And she does all these kinds of really quirky, unusual stories, like whether it's female roller derby athletes, but she did this whole series on wet plate with like nudists and like old nudists as like portraits of them. And it's really weird and funny and interesting. And so I always that's like, I think my next thing that I want to try to figure out. But for me, I shoot on a Fuji medium format system. This is genuinely relevant to the task that I was trying to kind of figure out. I was looking for a way to mount an anamorphic lens to it and not make it cost $20,000, right? So with the anamorphic lenses that exist, they're incredibly expensive. If you can rent one, at best you're getting it into something called a PL mount, which is an RE mount, which is used for cinema cameras. And they do a PL to Fuji adapter. It's like $1,000 adapter, and I just wasn't interested in that. Plus, I wouldn't ever be able to own a lens because they're all, $20,000, $30,000. And so I've seen people adapt anamorphic projector lenses to their cameras, which is a thing that kind of hobbyists and even kind of mid-level cinematographers I've seen do. They take this lens, they find this, they kind of Frankenstein it to another lens with all these different clamps and everything else, and they put it on their camera, and it gives you that weird squeeze, right? It gives the 2x squeeze. So I was on a quest to try to put it on my camera, and to put it onto a medium format system is exponentially harder the bigger the sensor size you have. So it works really well if you're looking at like a micro four thirds or even a crop to a degree. But once you start getting into a full frame and above, it's really, really difficult to kind of adapt and make work, just because you're shooting through so many different optics that it creates really kind of ridiculous like a barrel vignette around the lens. And so I kind of set out to I wanted to create a still camera that operated like a movie camera, that gave me like incredibly high resolving power and resolution, so that I could create stuff that felt like stills from movies and actually use the language of an anamorphic system. Because what you get, to kind of be overly technically nerdy about this with anamorphic, is you get the focal length of the lens you mount it to. And on a medium format, you have to be in somewhere around like 120, 130 millimeter-ish range. Whereas like a full frame, you're around 70. With a crop, you're around 50. And so you have to kind of start with this almost telephoto lens. And then the anamorphic goes on top of it and crams twice the width into the frame, right? So what you end up with is you get the compression of the original lens. So you're getting fundamentally a lens that looks like it's shot on a 130 millimeter lens, 135, right? Really great compression. Everything looks really up close, and you get a nice separation from the background, but you get the field of view of half of that. So you're getting a 135 millimeter lens at a 60 to 70 millimeter field of view. So when you're using wider angle lenses and stuff, if you can work it onto your camera, you may be like getting a 35 mil field of view on a 75 compression. So you don't get that crazy weird distortion of wide angle, but you also get a wide angle. The challenge is you have to focus either two different lens elements at the same time, or add a secondary diopter to the end of it, which gets crazy expensive. And then you have to put it on rails and put a follow focus on it. And it becomes a massively huge system to photograph with. It's incredibly complicated to use.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
See,
That's what a stunning way to go about it.
And the funny thing about
Do you
that
want to see
is-
it? I have it right over here.
Really?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
So this is what it became.
Oh, wow.
Right? Let me actually move it over here. So that's what it became.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
this is the GFX 100, right?
Yeah.
That's the GFX 100. Then I ended up trying to use a Fuji adapter, a Fuji lens on. I couldn't quite get a sharp enough image. So I ended up adapting, there's an old Pentax 135 that I had lying around, which is here with an adapter for that. So I'm already to here. Keep in mind, this is a medium format size camera. It's not a small camera to begin with. So then it goes to here. Then you adapt it. This is an anamorphic here. Then it gets the diopter here, which is the focusing diopter, because I didn't want to have to focus two lenses at the same time.
Yeah.
Then I put a matte box on it with a black magic on the inside to kind of soften the optics a little bit, make it feel a little bit more filmy. And then, of course, you have to run a de-squeezer screen onto it, so you can actually see what you're looking at live. And so what I have to do is I use a remote, I punch in on it, I use the follow focus to zoom in, and then I push the button to fire it.
Awesome.
The challenge I found has been to tether with it. And so I actually kind of had to figure out because you Capture One and Lightroom don't let you use a 2x pixel ratio, an anamorphic pixel ratio natively. You have to bring it into Photoshop for that, which sucks if you're tethering in studio.
Right.
So what I ended up doing you can run it to a much bigger Sumo if you have it, like the big external screens, or with these, the little guy. It's got an HDMI in on it. What I did for it, just as a trial run, is I ran it as a secondary monitor onto my computer. And then, so what you could do with the Sumo, obviously, which is much bigger, you run it as a secondary monitor, set that to the de-squeeze, and then set your preview window and Capture One to the second monitor, and it'll de-squeeze it live for you. It was a whole like Rube Goldbergian process. It took me a couple months to figure out.
He's still processing.
But I get fascinated by like that kind of weird stuff.
That's it. I mean, I take it you're not going to exactly go out and shoot some street with that.
Oh, you absolutely can.
Because that would be
absolutely can. I built it to go on a shoulder rig, and then you basically run the follow focus, and then you do this. It's awkward as hell to do it, and it's not quick to use. It's really not quick. But I've taken it outside, like I've taken it around the house outside and stuff. It totally works. It's just awkward. It's big.
Cool.
I'd love to get a shot of you using that outside. That'd just be immense.
It's cool. Yeah. It's heavy. It's heavy and it's big. It's probably close to 2 feet long. Like all things attached. It's quite a couple feet long.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that's what I've been doing the last couple of months.
Yeah. That's quite the COVID lockdown project.
Damn straight, isn't it? Why didn't we do something like that? It's amazing.
Well, we started a podcast.
All right, fine.
Yeah, I mean that's fair.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, we're now like 63 episodes in, so we're still going.
Busy.
Okay. Although as a measure of how long ago this whole thing started, that's that is insane.
Are you doing one a week? Is that kind of how you're doing?
Yeah. So we literally we started at the beginning of the first lockdown over here in the UK. And so, So
you hit the ground running.
You're originally from Florida, as I've learned.
I grew up in Florida, is what I like to say. I don't like to say Germany, I'm from Florida. Florida has a bad rap.
Right.
No offense to people in Florida who are listening there, but like if you live there, it's.
But so what I'm saying is, like, you should be used to the heat, though.
Okay, so Florida is a very different thing. Florida, like many places that have very hot climates, they have acclimated to that in a way that's normal. Like in Florida, you don't spend all day every day outside. You're in your house in essentially AC place, and then you get in your car, which is AC, and you go to the store, which is AC. Like everything's temperature controlled. Whereas like here in New York, for example, like the bodegas or the restaurants, a lot of them are used to like half outside seating. So you're sitting outside just sweating into your meal. Or you go into the grocery, you have to walk to the grocery store where it's hot, and it's just, nobody really kind of plans for it in a way that's is conducive to, the southern people who have that kind of under control, to their credit.
When did you shift from Florida to New York?
I have been in New York for about 10 years.
About 10. Was that a work-related reason that you decided to go there, or just for other personal reasons?
So I was working in the Miami market for a few years. That was where I assisted. That was kind of the first big city that I moved to from the town that I kind of grew up in. And I got an opportunity for a job. It was a startup up here that a friend of mine was working for, and brought me on to kind of head their creative division, which was very, very all-encompassing. And I worked for that job for about a year. And as a startup, it didn't survive. And when it kind of went under, I went back. Like I was still doing photo stuff for the company, but it wasn't my primary focus. And then I went back to it being my primary focus afterward. Okay. I kind of go, oh, well, let's try this again. And I basically started over. Started over in New York, which is a tough place to start over.
Yeah,
to be honest.
It's quite a saturated market.
Yeah, I mean, it's full of incredibly talented people who are always trying to. They're incredibly talented, and they're incredibly motivated. Like they're hustlers. And, I think that's kind of a big part of what you have to be in those big cities to really make it happen. It's tough. It's tough.
Have you found that you've needed to, certainly when obviously when you started over and you up in New York, did you find that you needed to up your game with regards to that hustle? Or did you find that your work actually spoke for itself?
So for me, I came from the Miami market. My work was incredibly light, bright, commercial, smiley, laughy. There's hardly any of that still exists anywhere in my portfolio. I think I've maybe got like one or two limited, but mostly no. Like none of that really kind of exists anymore. It didn't really mean anything up in this market. I think people were less concerned about your ability to shoot a catalog and more concerned with what kind of an image you would like to take. What does the image do? What are you trying to do with your photography that's different from a zillion other people, And it's a different world to operate in. Whereas if you have a portrait studio in XYZ town, you likely have a body of work that lends itself to the kind of clientele that you're obviously getting hired to do. And a lot of times those kinds of same people have to dip their hands into a lot of different bowls to fulfill those needs. Whereas in a much bigger city, specialization is much more the focus. And so it becomes, all right, well, what's your genre? What do you do well? Right. It's like if you're a doctor, somebody explained this to me a long time ago. If you're a doctor and you're an amazing brain surgeon, podiatrist, plastic surgeon, whatever, like all of these things, and you're amazing at all of them. And then you have this one guy over here who only does brain surgery, and he's just as good, same level of skill set. Most people, when they need brain surgery, are going to go to the person who that's all they do. Yeah. And so for me, it forced me to take inventory and figure out what kind of work I wanted to make. Part of this had to do with, I was still shooting casually when I had the job. And I was able to just create work that was for me, that I liked. And, it started to get a little darker and moodier and stuff. And that was the stuff that appealed to me visually, aesthetically, and emotionally. And so I kind of started experimenting around and playing a bit with that in that time. And I was actually really fortunate. Shortly after, I got a gig as an adjunct teacher at a school, which I now teach at pretty regularly, pretty full time. I was teaching Photoshop for them, and I eventually parlayed into some other programs that I teach for them as well. But I was really fortunate in that the teaching was able to keep me afloat and one of my favorite things about teaching outside of, obviously the rewarding, the giving back thing, all that stuff, which is great and why people who teach, but it also afforded me the opportunity to say no to shitty jobs. Like and this is why I do not bemoan the idea of people doing photography as a secondary thing or as something you're passionate about and that you love, because you get to create work that you want to create. And if there's a job that seems awful to you, you can just go, nah,
Sure.
And I have gotten better in my life about being able to look at certain jobs and go, I feel like you're going to be a hassle. No. But hey, that's a really valuable, I think, thing for any of us to kind of keep in mind is, if you're going to get great images, sometimes you're willing to do it for a little bit less money, but maybe the hassle is going to be there. It's like that balance of like the cheap, fast, and good. Like I have another one where it's like quality of work, money, and difficulty of the client or difficulty of the situation. And you need to kind of hit on two of those usually. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily always need to have the third. But someone once told me, like, if there's a job you really don't want to do, double your price and you'll enjoy it a lot more.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's really important about you doing the work, you're just at least going to make some money to do it,
Well, actually, in fact, I mean, we talked about this in last week's episode, because, the reality, of course, throughout COVID over here, throughout the lockdown, was that as somebody who shoots people predominantly, it's really, you really, in a sense, you're stuck because you can't actually get close to any people. And so, it's,
Yes.
that was a problem. So, what did happen was that, I got some very weird calls for things to shoot that I didn't really expect. And I did exactly the same thing.
Like what?
Well, somebody called me up and asked me to shoot his garden. And I kind of thought,
okay.
Yeah. Well, so, but the whole thing was rather strange. And so I used the same strategy. I basically, I said like, well, because I actually didn't want to do it initially. And, I said like, well, have you seen my website? And he goes, yeah. Now, so you've seen what my rates are? And he goes, yes. And so, well, I'm going to have to charge you a half day rate, as a minimum. And he goes like, oh yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, okay. And he literally lived like 5 minutes from me. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going to see you Friday.
I'm coming to shoot your shrub.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it turned out to be an absolutely bona fide job and everything, but it just sounded odd. And initially I didn't really feel like I wanted to do it, and then I had, my hungry child, opened the empty fridge, and I realized, I had to put some food in there. So
You're talking about the dog, aren't you?
well, yeah. But yeah, let me say, it's one of the real advantages, I think, of the last, 12 months or 18 months or something, was that I think, had it not been for COVID, like, I most likely would still be doing the same thing that I was doing 18 months ago. And as a matter of fact, I'm not, and I weirdly think that photographically, my career and the things that I do now, it has actually accelerated the process in a weird way, because somehow there was time to experiment, there was time to reflect, there was time to really think about, how I wanted to do things, and and so and that was actually extremely valuable.
And that's if you actually make the most of that time,
Yeah,
and sure. We've talked to several guests in the last few months who have and there is a common theme, isn't there, that they've all tried to make the most of this time, whether that's as simple as redeveloping their website, whether it's learning a new technique, whether it's whatever it might be.
Netflix,
but no Netflix. That's the thing. Maybe at first we all did at first, but they've all tried to progress something while they can't actually do.
See, I mean, the interesting thing was, of course, through starting the podcast and having the opportunity to speak to lots of different people who, ultimately we've all kind of experienced sort of the same sort of thing. It's been interesting to talk to people and see how people manage to, get on with their lives throughout this whole pandemic thing, and that's definitely been extremely useful.
Yeah.
Throughout.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, but I also completely get, because I to a large degree also treated it as a somewhat of a time off. I mean,
sure.
It's a really difficult time for a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. But fingers crossed, we never really have anything like this again.
Yeah,
that would be ideal. And so if you were the kind of person who just needed to not do anything and just kind of appreciate the world for what it is, and if that was more valuable to you, then great. Like, I know there's a lot of people out there who were itching to create, and they had that need to do stuff and make stuff. And then there's other people who just go, you know what? I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, the world stopped. Let's just embrace that.
Yeah, sure.
For now, and try to hunker down and be safe, and
just having the time and the space to actually move certain things forward at your pace. Basically, that was I felt that was the without a lot of the other pressures around, that was definitely a huge benefit. What I wanted to talk to you about is and you sort of alluded to that initially, is also how you started to develop your personal style, because you said you came from the sort of Miami scene of the bright and the happy, kind of imagery, and you sort of arrived at the kind of dramatic and cinematic, kind of portraiture. Almost like it's kind of like the polar opposite in a sense, isn't it? It's like slightly desaturated, it's that kind of painterly look. Was that something? And I know that a lot of your influences stem from the old masters, as it were.
Yeah,
sure.
Was that always? Was that something that's always interested you from the get-go, or was that something that you sort of fell into and then it just opened the floodgates?
No, I mean, I was always into movies. Movies have always been a huge love of mine. Like, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a movie director. Like, I love movies and watching movies and all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of always a big draw for me in the beginning. When I was making that more commercial work, it was usually about creating work for other people, not for me. And once I was able to create work outside of the confines of needing it to be for other people and just for me, I generally I started to lean more into the other stuff, because I never really got to shoot dark stuff in Miami. Right? Like, nobody really wanted that there. And so this was me just kind of exploring things that were new. And I really responded to it in a way that made me really happy. And so, which is ironic. But it was, that was kind of what led me to it. I kind of go, oh, this is cool. I like this. This is different. This is interesting. This speaks to me a little bit more authentically, and that was kind of how it turned into. Some people kind of come to their creative medium completely fully formed, and they just know who they are right off the bat. Other people have to grow into it. Some people never figure it out who they are. But we always develop and change, and we're gonna have different periods and moods, styles for our work at different points in our life. It's always going to change. Some people set out to do it in a way that's completely conscious, and they say, this is the kind of work that I want to create. This is my checklist of style. Let's go out and make work that looks like this. Whereas other people fall into it a little bit more organically. You can sometimes get to where you're going a little bit faster if you relax, man. It's raining a little bit, so it's like knocking trees around. So the hope is that you have a fully fleshed out style, vision, voice, whatever you want to call it. But it takes a lot of time for you to develop that for yourself, whether it's intentional or organic. And the biggest thing for it is, even if you decide, hey, this is what I want my work to look like, the more you just kind of dive down that hole, the more it's going to change. And the more you're going to kind of do your own thing with it. And that's why, I don't bemoan the people who, when you're learning, you explore the styles of other people, because you'll eventually go, I'm going to take a little bit of this, I'm going to take a little bit of that, I'm going to kind of plug it all in and do my own thing with it. I think that's totally fine when you are going through that process, because, we're nothing if not visual problem solvers, and you get to see how other people have solved the XYZ problem. Mm-hmm. And it helps you kind of get into the rhythm of photography and image making by kind of going through the motions and the steps that someone else has walked.
And that's not too dissimilar in music. I mean, both Nick and me have a background in music, and when you learn a musical instrument, it's actually, the process is exactly the same, because we're learned by imitating, other players.
Absolutely.
And over time, all like your choices eventually determine the unique player that you'll become over time. But the process is a really long process, and so
totally. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite all-time musicians is Prince, and no one can kind of argue that Prince is an original and had his own style. But man, you go back and you look at Prince's earliest stuff. Prince wanted real bad to be Jimi Hendrix. Like he dressed like Jimi Hendrix, he played guitar like Jimi Hendrix. Yeah. Prince is also one of the greatest guitar players ever. Like, he's usually not given enough credit for how great he is at guitar.
Yeah, absolutely. True.
But because it's just, he does a million other things extraordinarily well. But I mean, go look at his work in his early years. He wanted to be Jimi Hendrix real bad, and that was like, he eventually became Prince.
Yeah.
It's like right. That process, whether you're a nobody or a huge person, like you all learn by. We all learn by.
The funny thing about Jimi Hendrix was, of course, that Hendrix, when he was younger, he used to play in like R&B bands.
Is that right?
Yeah. So he used to play like all like R&B, Motown hits of the time, and
I can understand that.
And when you knowing that, you listen to some of his rhythm guitar playing and you go, that makes perfect sense. Totally. I don't know why I never thought about this before, but you can hear the influences in there when you start looking.
But also, when he was younger, when he was like what, a couple of years before Woodstock, because he was 27 when he died. Was he a 27?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's he.
You see him and you don't ever think of him as being that young. True. Like in the videos and the stills and stuff, but he was so young.
Yeah, and his own, like, his personal style really came out when when they put him together with Mitch Mitchell and and a bunch of Brits essentially.
But sometimes
he definitely got that old kind of the Brit version of the blues. That's definitely kind of in there.
Sometimes you do need people at certain very specific people around you to
Yeah, for sure.
bring out a very particular thing out of you, right? And, you know, I could be surrounded by you two, and what needs to come out of me just doesn't happen. I could be surrounded by two other people. For whatever reason, it just draws the right thing out of me. You can't necessarily know what they... Don't worry, you would.
I think
You
Chris
would, man.
and you could do that. I mean, it's, you know,
You
yeah,
would,
for sure.
totally,
100%.
totally. But it's you know, it's that third album complex as well. You know, particularly when bands are signed right near the start of their sort of formation, if you like, they start developing. It just turns out that what people really liked is what they started as, and as they develop, they don't necessarily appeal to different people.
But I guess the thing is, like in photography, for instance, you know, and I see this all the time. Like, in fact, you know, my stepdaughter is a really good example because she's studying photography at high school, so she's going to be a photography major. But she's really experimenting with a whole ton of different things, and it's literally because she's in that sort of learning phase. You know, she's learning about lighting, doing one thing, and she's learning about something else, doing another thing, and I don't think she has the foggiest idea as to, you know, what she wants to pursue. But that's great at that age. Perfect. I mean, just take it all in. You know, try different things.
Yeah, I have this theory that I believe that there is this trajectory that most artists have, right? And there is like this intersection of popularity in pop culture, right? That there's like this, they think of like they're taking off from like a planet and they're going into space. Like there's an area at which most people are like, oh man, I love this. What you're doing is great. And then they usually keep getting weirder. Like the more they explore their thing, like sometimes people don't like it as much because they liked it when it was closer to this less experimental weird thing. And we as artists oftentimes want to keep creating and pushing and doing new things, but it's not always what the masses like for whatever reason. We kind of just have to do it to satiate ourselves. Like I mean, I have images who are like, oh, you like this style. I'm like, yeah, but I'm better than that now. Like this isn't what I'm into. But like, oh no, but I want to do like this old stuff that you were doing. I'm like, not really exciting to me anymore. You know, I think we all regularly have a trajectory that kind of looks like that. And it's this weird inner battle of balancing this thing that, you know, people may want us to do and what we want to do. And it's a whole thing. You're right though. Like there's with hugely influential people, they usually have like a credit where they can kind of do whatever they want for the rest of their lives. And because they had that early success, they'll always have the credit. You know what I mean? Like, I love like a lot of like, let's say Bruce Springsteen's newer catalog. I think is great. Or Paul McCartney's new stuff is great. Bob Dylan's new stuff is still like, he's still got it going on. I mean, yeah, like we look back at his stuff 50 years ago and that was the amazing, you know, whatever. But like, he's still got it. It's just, it's tends to be a little bit weirder, a little bit more experimental. It's kind of them taking the path a little bit further away to see how far they can push that thing they're doing. But you know, I think the deep dives in some of the later work of some of these artists is, you know, the ones that are still trying to innovate and not rest on their laurels is totally worth an exploration and a watch. Same is true for artists. Like, I mean, you look at like, let's say an Irving Penn. Irving Penn is not necessarily known for his still lives. I mean, in some degree, yes, but like, you know, like his extra close-up pictures of cigarette butts that he found on the street, right? Like the average person doesn't celebrate him for that. But man, it's interesting and it's good and it's worth that deep dive into the back catalog because there's some real good work in there.
Yeah, I tell you what's cool about this sometimes is that, I mean, this is both true for photography as it is for music. You know, sometimes you find like you're into an artist because you discover them at a certain time, and then when you start looking at some of the history, maybe at first you go, because it's so different, you're gonna go, oh, I'm not sure about that. That's not why I initially invested into that artist, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
But as you discover more, as you go down that track, you sort of it really starts to grow on you, and before you know it, you might actually like the older stuff much more than the current stuff. A lot of bands are like that. Annie Leibovitz for me was one of those cases where I loved her stuff, and it's more like the kind of the stuff that she's done over the last maybe 15 years or something, like the Vogue stuff and whatever. And then I got at work, the book, and I looked through it. And at first, I was like, I don't know, that's not what I expected at all. And then the more I got into it, I really got into it.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of really drew me in, and it's just added another dimension to it.
Exactly the same as finding whatever band it is that you're into, and then understanding who did they listen to.
Well, yeah, that's a big one.
Because it's all pushed into it. And it's exactly the same with photography as well. Yeah, if you can understand where they've come from and you can kind of follow their journey, it kind of helps you understand your journey and why you're into Andy Leibovitz, for example, and where they're going. Well, what can I now do? Where's that pushing me?
So you're also a lecturer at the New York Film Academy and the Pratt Institute. Is that something that's has that been sort of slightly? How's that working at the moment? Are you back to face-to-face lectures, or?
So we've been doing face-to-face in a couple of the programs. By and large, we are still mostly doing online. Right. Any class that can be taught online typically is. So, like a history of photography is a Photoshop class, typically online. But when it comes to doing like in-person photo 101 stuff, lighting and stuff like that, I do that in person. We've been back since March.
So do you have any more plans of any more courses?
I am actually. I'm doing something for Fuji, which we are filming in the next few weeks, which is going to be a several-part video series, basically on kind of makeshift DIY lighting modifiers and stuff, and kind of making your own, and the different ways you can kind of implement that in studio and on location. So it'd be a cool thing for kind of exploring light shaping and being a little bit more experimental with what that can bring to the table for you. That's my next big project.
Thank you so much, Chris, for being our special guest on episode 63 of the Camera Shake podcast. It was a total education. I hope you're not totally melting away over there.
No, I'm surviving.
So again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, guys.
And of course, if you have been listening to the audio version of this podcast, make sure to check out the full Technicolor version on YouTube. Likewise, if you are on YouTube and you need some entertainment for the car, be aware that we are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, whatever. So with that in mind, that's us for this week. We'll be back next Thursday. As always, stay safe. See you then.